The morning of the wedding, I woke up before the alarm. The hotel suite was still dark, the curtains drawn tight against what promised to be a bright June day. Beside me, the indent on the pillow where Mark's head had rested was cold. He'd been up for hours already. I could hear the low murmur of his voice through the bathroom door, phone pressed to his ear, words too muffled to make out but the tone unmistakably tensed. I lay still, sta ring at the ceiling, and counted back. We rode 10 months since we met at a charity auction where he'd outbid 3 people for a painting I'd casually admired. 8 months since he'd proposed on a rooftop overlooking the city, the skyline glittering behind him like a promise. 4 months since his father's funeral, where I'd stood in a black dress and watched Mark's mother, Evelyn, clutch her son's arm so tightly her knuckles went white. And 3 days since I'd found the folder I'd been looking for a sparry phone charger in Mark's study. He'd said I could use his desk while mine was being delivered to the new house. The folder was wedged between a tax return from 2019 and a faded photograph of his father at a factory groundbreaking ceremony. Plain Manila, UNMARKed. I'd opened it without thinking, because that's what you do when you've been married for 6 months and you still trust every drawer in your husband's study. Inside, a single document, a draft of a shareholder transfer agreement. Mark's name on the top line as the transferring party. Evelyn's name on the receiving line. And a date, today's date, the wedding day, already filled in. I'd stood there for a long time, the paper trembling in my fingers. Then I'd taken a photograph with my phone, slid the folder back exactly where I'd found it, and walked out of the study without making a sound. Now, on the morning of our wedding, I pushed back the duvet and padded across the thick carpet to the bathroom door. The murmuring stopped. A beat of silence, then the toilet flushed and the door swung open. Mark stood there in his undershirt, hair mussed, phone still in his hand. "You're up, EARLY, he said. His smile was quick, practiced, the same one he'd worn when he proposed. It didn't quite reach his eyes. Couldn't sleep. Nerves, I guess. I wrapped my arms around myself, suddenly cold despite the warm air. Who were you talking to, Mom? She wanted to go over the seating chart one last time. You know how she is. He brushed past me, his shoulder grazing mine. Everything's fine. She's just anxious about everything being perfect. Anxious. That was one word for it. An hour later, I was in the bridal suite with my maid of honor, Diane, while the stylist fussed with my veil. Diane's been my best friend since college, the kind of woman who can read a room faster than most people can read a menu. She watched me stare at my reflection without blinking and finally put down the safety pins. Okay, talk to me. You've been zoning out since I got here. Is it cold feet because that's normal? I ate an entire pizza the morning of my wedding and threw up on my mother's shoes. Not cold feet. I touched the lace on my sleeve, running my thumb over the pattern. Diane, if you found out something about Mark, something that changed how you saw him, what would you do? She tilted her head, a question in her eyes. What kind of something? Before I could answer, the door burst open and Evelyn swept in like she was making an entrance on a stage. She wore a silk robe the color of burgundy, her hair already pinned into an elaborate updo, and the smile she fixed on me was as sharp as cut glass. There you are, darling. I wanted to have a quick word before the ceremony. She waved a hand at the stylist, who immediately retreated to the corner with her curling iron. Diane shifted closer to me, her posture changing almost imperceptibly. I think maybe this can wait until, Diane sta rude. Oh, it's just between us girls. Evelyn's smile never wavered. She perched on the arm of a NEARBY chair, arranging her robe precisely. I wanted to tell you how happy I am that you're marrying my son. I waited. There was always a but with Evelyn. I know it hasn't been easy, stepping into a family with so much history. The business, the legacy, all those years of hard work. She reached out and patted my hand. But I want you to know, I understand. You're young. You'll Leah RN. Leah RN, what I asked, keeping my voice neutral. How things work. Her smile stayed fixed. My husband, rest his soul, he was a generous man. Too generous, sometimes. He believed in giving people chances they hadn't earned. She squeezed my fingers, just a little too hard. I'm not like that. I believe in family. Blood family. Diane made a small sound in her throat. I shot her a look, and she subsided. Of course, I said. Blood family. Evelyn released my hand and stood, smoothing her robe. Well, I won't keep you. Lots to do, and we want everything to be just perfect, don't we? She paused at the door, looking back over her shoulder. Oh, and darling, the speech Mark's giving today. I helped him write it. I think you'll find it very meaningful. Then she was gone, trailing the faint scent of Chanel No. 5, and Diane exhaled like she'd been holding her breath. What the hell was that? She demanded. Did she just threaten you on your wedding day? I looked at my reflection again. The veil was perched perfectly, the makeup flawless, the dress a creation of silk and dreams that had cost more than I'd earned in my first year out of law school. I thought about the folder in Mark's study, the transfer agreement with today's date, and Evelyn's cold, glittering eyes. She didn't threaten me, I said slowly. She warned me. The ceremony was beautiful. I'll give it that. The flowers were white peonies and Giarden roses, the ones I'd admired in a magazine when we first sta route planning. The string quartet played a version of Pachelbel's canon that made half the guests tear up. My mother cried into a handkerchief my father kept refolding for her. Diane stood behind me, gripping my bouquet like it was a lifeline. Mark looked handsome in his charcoal suit, his smile wide and reassuring as I walked down the aisle. He took my hands when I reached the altar, and for a moment, I let myself believe that maybe I'd been wrong. Maybe the folder was a draft that had been abandoned. Maybe Evelyn's warning was just her way of being protective. Maybe, before we proceed to the vows, the officiant announced, the groom has read a special statement. Mark squeezed my hands, then stepped toward the microphone set up at the edge of the altar. A small stand, subtle enough that I hadn't noticed it wire. Behind him, Evelyn rose from her seat in the front row, her burgundy dress a vivid splash of color against the pale blue of the church. Thank you all for being here today, Mark began. His voice was steady, RSED. This is the happiest day of my life, and I'm grateful to share it with so many people who matter to me. He paused, and his eyes flicked to his mother. Just briefly, just a flicker. But before I take my vows to my beautiful bride, I need to honor another commitment. A promise I made to my family, and most of all, to my mother. The crowd rustled. I heard my mother's sharp intake of breath. Diane's hand found my elbow, steadying me. Effective immediately, Mark said, pulling a folded document from his inside pocket. I am transferring all my Shaw Residential and Prosperity holdings to my mother, Evelyn Chin. The transfer is complete, irrevocable, and made with the full intention of preserving my father's legacy exactly as he would have wanted. He unfolded the paper and held it up, as if to prove it was real. The light from the stained glass windows caught the edge of it, making it look almost translucent. I do this, he continued, because some things are more important than money. Some things are about loyalty. About blood. Evelyn stood now, walking slowly to the altar, her heels clicking on the marble floor. She took the paper from her son's hand, beaming at the congregation. And let me be very clear, Mark added, his voice dropping, but the microphone caught every word. My wife, Lily, receives no share of these assets. Not now, not ever. She married into a family, but she doesn't take a family's legacy. Silence. The violinist's bow froze mid-motion. The woman in the third pew dropped her program. My father's face went the color of parchment, and my mother made a sound like she'd been struck. I stood there at the altar, alone now, because Mark had stepped back to stand beside his mother. They faced me together, mother and son, the sun streaming through the stained glass and painting their shoulders in red and blue and gold. Evelyn's smile was radiant, triumphant, the smile of a woman who'd finally gotten what she'd been waiting for since the day her husband died. And I smiled back. I didn't plan it. I didn't see it. I just smiled, calm and unhurried, like I'd been expecting this all along. Because the truth was, in some ways, I had. I gathered my bouquet and my veil and my $1,000 heels, and I walked toward the microphone. I walked slowly, with the same measured steps I'd practiced at the rehearsal dinner, because in a strange way, it was exactly the same script, just different dialogue. The congregation held its breath. Mark's smile wavered. Evelyn's eyes narrowed, urching my face for something, maybe, or TRS, or the hysterical breakdown she'd clearly counted on. I bent to the microphone, my lips inches from the grill. Mark, I said, and my voice came out calm as a glass of water. Are you sure that's your company to give? Then I straightened, stepped back, and watched the whole beautiful, expensive, fully orchestrated day fall apart. Later, I couldn't tell you exactly what happened next. There was a blur of voices, my mother calling my name, Diane pulling me aside with a face like thunder. I saw Mark's face go slack, then red, then pale again. Evelyn reached for his arm, but he shook her off and took a stumbling step toward me. What did you just say? He was trying to keep his voice low, but the microphone was still on. It picked up every tight, sharp syllable. I said, are you sure that's your company? I kept my hands folded at my waist, calm as a schoolteacher. Your father's company, Mark. Not yours. Not until certain conditions are met. Conditions. Evelyn's voice cut through the murmur of the crowd. Her composure had cracked at the edges, a hairline fracture that showed the steel underneath. What conditions? The company was my husband's, and it passed to his son. The documentation is airtight. I reached into my bouquet. It sounds theatrical, but I'd planned it that way. The stems I'd chosen were long, and inside the hidden waterproof sleeve at their center, I'd stashed a folded envelope. I pulled it out now, the cream paper stark against the white ribbon of the blooms. Your husband's will was executed 6 months ago, I said. But there was an addendum. A codicil, filed separately, with a different law firm. I looked at Evelyn, and for the first time, I let my smile fade. He signed it 3 days before he died. Did he mention that? Evelyn's face went very, very still. A codicil, Mark repeated. His voice cracked. What are you talking about? I handled all the paperwork after Dad, the paperwork you knew about. I opened the envelope and slid out a single sheet of paper. There was another copy. One his lawyer kept confidential until specific conditions were met. What conditions? Mark's voice was louder now, desperate. I turned to the congregation. The whole church was frozen, 300 people collectively holding their breath, the summer sun blazing through the windows like a spotlight. The condition, I said, was that if the Shaw residential were ever transferred to anyone except me, anyone, the full value reverts to a charitable trust established by Mr. Chin during his lifetime. The trust is already registered. The transfer Mark just announced is, legally, null and void. The silence that followed wasn't just silence. It was a vacuum, the kind of quiet that swallows everything, breath, thought, the distant hum of traffic outside. I heard my own heartbeat, steady and slow. Evelyn made a sound, a choked gasp that might have been a word or might have been nothing. Mark read at me like I'd sprouted a second head. You had this the whole time? He asked. You knew what I was going to do, and you knew. I tilted my head. Mark, I found your folder 3 days ago. I know exactly what you planned. You were going to strip me of everything on our wedding day and hope I was too humiliated to fight back. No, that wasn't, I didn't mean, he was stammering now, all the polished rehearsal draining out of him. Mom, tell her. Tell her it was just, Evelyn cut him off. Her voice was ice. Where did you get that document? Your husband's lawyer called me 2 weeks ago. I folded the paper and tucked it back into my bouquet. He said if I ever needed proof of the codicil, he'd deliver it in person. I asked him to wait until today. He called you. Evelyn's composure shattered entirely. That's impossible. You made sure he'd keep quiet, I asked, almost gently. You've done a lot of work to control this family, Evelyn. But your husband prepper read for that. I looked at Mark, then at the congregation, then back at his mother. He loved you. Both of you. But he wasn't blind. I stepped back from the microphone. Behind me, Diane was already pulling my mother to her feet, my father's hands steadying them both. The ceremony was over, everyone could see that. I'm not going to stand here and let this become a courtroom drama, I said. But I'm also not going to pretend today didn't happen. So let me be clear, I'm not asking for anything except what your husband gave me freely. And if you want to contest that, you'll have to do it in court, because I won't be coerced into silence. I walked down the aisle, through the rows of frozen, ring faces. My shoes echoed on the marble, each step a separate beat of silence. My mother grabbed my hand, squeezing so hard her rings bit into my skin. I squeezed back, and I kept walking. Behind me, I heard Evelyn's voice rise, sharp with fury. I heard Mark's stammered protests, his desperate attempts to smooth things over. I heard the sudden rush of conversation as the guests realized the show was over. And then I was out the doors, into the blazing summer sunlight, with nothing but a bouquet and a stolen moment of peace. I didn't look back. I knew if I looked back, I'd see his face, the man I'd married, the man I thought I knew, and I wasn't ready for that yet. Because the truth was, I hadn't told them everything. The codicil was real. The charitable trust was real. But there was one more line, the last line of that yellowing addendum, that I'd kept to myself. It was the line that would change everything, if they ever pushed me far enough. To my daughter-in-law, Lily, it read, in my father-in-law's wavering handwriting, who will understand what to do with the rest when the time comes. And she will know the time, because I've taught her. The rest. The party that hadn't been filed with any lawyer, that was hidden in a safety deposit box at a bank in a city I'd never visited, under a name I'd never spoken. That was the real legacy. But I'd save that for another day. For now, the sun was warm on my face, and my mother was crying beside me, and Diane was already calling for a sier. I had a whole life to figure out what came next. The hotel lobby was quiet when I walked in, my heels clicking against the polished marble like a metronome counting out the seconds since I'd left the church. Diane had driven me here, my mother in the back seat still clutching my bouquet like a talisman, my father making calls to cancel the reception hall. I'd asked them to drop me off at the Grand Central, a business hotel downtown, because I needed a place to think that didn't smell like wedding flowers and broken promises. The room was standard issue, beige walls, a king bed with a duvet so stiff it could stand on its own, a view of the parking garage. I sat on the edge of the bed and finally let myself breathe. My phone buzzed. Then buzzed again. Then root buzzing in a continuous, angry vibration that made the nightstand tremble. Mark, 37 missed calls. Evelyn, 1. My mother-in-law had apparently decided that one call was enough, which meant she'd either given up or was regrouping. I knew Evelyn well enough to bet on regrouping. My mother's texts came in a steady stream, each one a small wave of panic. Are you safe? Where did you go? Your father wants to drive down. Should we come get you? Please eat something? Don't forget to eat. I typed back, I'm fine. Hotel. Need quiet. Talk tomorrow. Then I turned the phone face down and sat in the dark for a long time. Somewhere around midnight, my hand moved of its own accord toward my purse. The bouquet was gone. I'd left it in Diane's car, but the envelope I'd pulled from its stems was still in my bag, folded now and tucked into the inner pocket where I kept my passport. I took it out and held it under the weak glow of the bedside lamp. The codicil I'd read aloud at the church was the public priority of my father-in-law's plan. The charitable trust, the reversion clause, the CA-REFL legal language that would make any attempt to cut me out of very expensive lawsuit. But underneath that page, folded with the same yellowed paper, was a second document. A letter.id found it in the same safety deposit box, tucked behind the codicil in a manila folder marked with my name. I hadn't opened it until 3 days ago, when I'd stumbled across Mark's transfer agreement and realized I needed to know everything. The letter was written in my father-in-law's hand, the penmanship shaky but legible, the lines slightly uneven where his hand had trembled. It began, "Lily, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and my son has done what I feared he would do. I'm sorry. I wanted to believe he could be different, but I've known his mother too long to hope for miracles." I'd read those words 3 times in the hotel bathroom, the sound of Mark's shower running in the background, and each time I'd felt the same cold CLA righty settle over me. My father-in-law had been dying, and in his last days, he'd spent his dwindling energy not on comfort, but on building a fortress around the things he loved. The letter went on to explain the safety deposit box's location, a branch of a small regional bank 3 states away, in a town I'd never visited. The key was taped to the back of the letter, a small brass thing that looked like it belonged to a school locker. Inside, you'll find the remaining documents. Not the codicil, not the trust papers, those are just the guardrails. The real legacy is in that box. I know you'll do the right thing with it. You've always done the right thing. He'd signed it with his full name and the date, 3 days before he died. I'd spent the next 2 days trying to decide whether to fly out and retrieve the box before the wedding. In the end, I'd chosen to stay. If Mark was going to betray me in front of 300 people, I wanted to face it head-on. I wanted to see his face when I turned his mother's game back on her. Now, alone in the hotel room, I realized I'd made the right call. The box would still be there. And I had a feeling I'd need its contents before this was over. At 6 in the morning, I called Diane. She answered on the first ring, her voice scratchy with sleeplessness. "Tell me you've been up all night plotting," she said. "Tell me you have a plan." "I have plenty of a plan." I sat up, rubbing my eyes. "I need to go out of town for a day or 2. Can you cover for me with my parents? Tell them I'm staying with you, processing. They'll believe that. They saw your face when Mark read that speech, they'll believe anything." She paused. "Lily, what are you planning?" "I'm going to see what my father-in-law left me. The real thing, not just the decoy." Diane didn't ask what that meant. She'd been my friend long enough to know when I wasn't ready to explain. I booked a flight for that afternoon under a name I rarely used, my maiden name, the one I'd kept on my driver's license out of pure inertia. I packed nothing but a change of clothes, the letter, and the brass key, and I left the hotel before the morning rush sta route. The flight took 3 hours, a regional hop across 2 time zones. I landed in a city that felt like it belonged to another decade, wide streets, low buildings, a courthouse with a clock tower that hadn't been updated since the 1950s. The bank was on Main Street, sandwiched between a hot RDWA restore and a diner with a neon sign that flickered open in pink cursive. I walked in at 2 in the afternoon, when the lobby was quiet and the tellers were eating lunch behind their counters. A woman with reading glasses on a chain escorted me to the safety deposit vault, a small room lined with boxes in various sizes. She checked my ID twice, read my signature to the one on file, then left me alone with the key in a heavy metal box that slid out of the wall with a soft scrape. The box was smaller than I'd expected, about the size of a shoebox, its surface scuffed and dented from years of storage. I lifted the lid and found a layer of brown tissue paper, then another, and then a collection of manila folders, each one labeled in my father-in-law's handwriting. I pulled them out one by one, property records, PA ridership agreements, offshore accounts, and one that made my breath catch, Evelyn's withdrawals. I opened that one first. Inside, a stack of bank statements, each one marked with yellow highlighter. Line after line of transfers from Prosperity Holdings accounts to personal accounts in Evelyn's name. The amounts ranged from a few $1,000s to six-figure sums, all labeled in the bank's official language as consulting fees or reimbursements or gifts. The total, I calculated slowly, came to over $800,000 over the past 5 years. My father-in-law had known. He'd known, and he'd documented every single transaction, keeping these statements in a bank box 3 states away from his wife's reach. I thought about Evelyn at the wedding, her elegant burgundy dress, her perfect hair, her voice dripping with contempt as she called me an outsider. She'd been bleeding the company for years, and she'd still had the nerve to lecture me about blood loyalty. I set that folder aside and opened the next one, PA ridership agreements. Inside, a document I hadn't expected. A PA ridership agreement between my father-in-law and a man named Roger Zhou, dated 32 years ago, establishing a manufacturing business that would eventually become Prosperity Holdings. The terms were straightforward: 50-50 ownership, with my father-in-law providing capital and Roger providing technical expertise. But there was a second document, signed a year later, that changed everything. It was an agreement stating that Roger's Shaw Residential would be held in trust, with my father-in-law retaining full voting rights and economic benefit. A handshake deal between 2 old friends, formalized on paper with more trust than any corporate lawyer would have recommended. I remembered the name Roger Zhou from my father-in-law's funeral. A man in his 70s, gray-haired and stooped, who'd sat in the back row and slipped out before the reception. Mark had pointed him out as one of Dad's old factory partners, and Evelyn had made a comment about him being a nobody who'd gotten lucky. Now I understood. Roger Zhou wasn't a nobody. He was the quiet partner, the man who'd never demanded credit, who'd kept his mouth shut and his loyalty intact for 3 decades. And if the documents in this box were accurate, he still held the legal title to a substantial portion of Prosperity Holdings. Not the Shaw Residential Massachusetts RK had tried to transfer, those were the public Shaw Res, the ones held in my father-in-law's name. But these private Shaw Res, the ones held in trust through Roger Zhou, were the real backbone of the company. They were also the ones my father-in-law had chosen to reserve for circumstances requiring discretion. I read the last line of the PA ridership agreement, then read it again. There was a clause, drafted in CA REFL legal language, that allowed the economic beneficiary to designate a new trustee upon death. My father-in-law had exercised that clause 3 days before he died, naming me as his designee. I sat back on the stool, the metal box open in front of me, my hands trembling just slightly. This was bigger than the codicil. The codicil was a defensive shield, a way to block Mark's transfer. The trust documents were something else entirely. They were an offensive weapon, a way to take control of the company itself. But there was a catch. The designation was conditional. The clause stipulated that the new trustee could only exercise voting rights if the original beneficiary's family had acted in bad faith against the interests of the trust. And bad faith was defined in a way that felt almost personal, including but not limited to, attempting to transfer trust assets without the consent of the named successor. Mark's wedding day speech had been an attempt to transfer trust assets without my consent. He'd unwittingly triggered the clause the moment he'd unfolded that paper and read it aloud. I closed the box, locked it, and sat for a long moment in the quiet of the bank vault. My phone was still off, but I knew what was waiting for me when I turned it back on. Mark's messages, his mother's increasingly desperate attempts to regain control. The media, if Evelyn had decided to take this public. The lawyers, circling like Shaw RKS who'd smelled blood. But I had something better than a lawyer. I had leverage. I walked out of the bank, slipped the key into my pocket, and found a small coffee shop where I could sit with a notepad and start making calls. The first call was to Diane, to let her know I was okay. The second was to my mother, who answered with a crack in her voice that made my heart twist. Mom, I'm fine. I'm coming home tomorrow. But I need you to do something for me. Anything, she said immediately. Just tell me you're safe. I'm safe. But I need you to find the number for Roger Joe. He was at the funeral. Old man, gray hair, sat in the back. I paused. I think I need to talk to him. My mother didn't ask why. She just said, I'll find it, and hung up. I spent the rest of the afternoon in that coffee shop, nursing a cup of tea that went cold, making notes on a napkin. The trust documents, the proprietorship agreement, the bank statements, they formed a picture I hadn't fully understood before. My father-in-law had built his company with one partner he trusted and one wife he didn't. He'd spent his last months, maybe his last year RSCA refully constructing a web of legal protection so that when he died, the thing he created wouldn't be torn apart by the person who'd already tried to dismantle it. And he'd chosen me to be the one who held it all together. I thought about Mark, the man I'd married, the man who'd stood at the altar and promised to love and honor me while his mother watched with that sharp, knowing smile. I'd loved him. I'd believed in him. I told myself that his deference to Evelyn was just a habit, a leftover from childhood that would fade once we built our own life together. I'd been wrong. His deference wasn't a habit, it was a choice, made over and over again, each time he let her dictate his decisions. The wedding day speech was the culmination of a lifetime of choosing her over anyone else who might have a claim on his loyalty. The thought hurt, but I wasn't going to let it break me. I'd come to FAR for that evening. I found a motel near the airport and checked in under my maiden name. The room smelled faintly of bleach, and the television had a screen so small I had to squint to read the subtitles. I sat on the bed with my phone finally on, scrolling through the messages I'd ignored. Mark's texts were a jagged progression of emotion, first angry, then pleading, then confused, then angry again. The last one, sent an hour ago, read, "You can't just ASAP AR. We need to talk. I need to explain." I typed a single word in response, explain what. His reply came within seconds, the transfer. Dad's company. Mom pressured me, she's been pressuring me for years. I didn't know how to say no. Please, Lily, just call me. I'll tell you everything. I read the message 3 times, looking for any sign that he understood what he'd done. Not just the legal breach, but the personal betrayal. The way he'd chosen her in front of everyone we knew, the way he'd made me the villain in his mother's script. That there was nothing in his words to suggest he'd made that connection. He still thought this was about the money. I didn't reply. Instead, I opened a new note on my phone and wrote drafting a plan. The proprietorship agreement, the trust, Roger Joe, the bank accounts. The pieces were all in place. I just had to figure out how to put them together without letting Evelyn burn the whole thing down around us. In the morning, I'd find Roger Joe. I'd tell him what his old friend had left me. I'd lay out the documents, the clauses, the conditions. And then I'd ask him what he thought I should do with them. Because I was learning something about my father-in-law, something that would have made me weep if I'd known it earlier. He'd given me not just the legal tools to protect myself, but the authority to choose my own path. He trusted me to make the decisions he'd no longer be around to make. That trust was more precious than any Shari certificate. And I wasn't going to waste it. I turned off the light and lay in the dark, listening to the distant hum of the interstate. Somewhere out there, Mark was waiting for my call. Evelyn was probably already on the phone with lawyers, trying to undo the damage I'd done. My parents were worried, Diane was vigilant, and Roger Joe had no idea a young woman he'd met once at a funeral was about to knock on his door with a box full of secrets. I smiled in the darkness. For the first time since I'd found that folder in Mark's study, I felt something other than dread. I felt ready. Roger Joe lived in a modest 2-story house on a quiet street lined with sycamores. The neighborhood was the kind where people knew each other's names, where mailboxes were decorated with hand-painted house numbers and garden hoses coiled neatly beside front doors. It was the sort of place I'd grown up in, and it felt strange to be here, 3 states away from the chaos I'd left behind, knocking on the door of a man who held half the keys to my father-in-law's empire. He opened the door himself, a thin man in his 70s with silver hair combed flat and reading glasses perched on his nose. He looked at me for a long moment, then nodded slowly, like he'd been expecting me. "You're Lily," he said. It wasn't a question. "Come in. I've been waiting for you." The house smelled like tea and old books. He led me to a living room filled with mismatched furniture, a floral sofa, a leather armchair that had seen better decades, a coffee table covered in newspapers. He gestured for me to sit and Giuseppe read into the kitchen, returning with 2 cups of jasmine tea. "Your father-in-law called me 2 days before he died," Roger said, settling into the armchair with the careful deliberation of a man who knew his body's limits. "He told me you might come. He said you'd know what to do." I set my cup down and opened my bag, pulling out the manila folders I'd retrieved from the bank box. I found the partnership agreement. And the trust documents. He named me as his successor trustee. Roger didn't look surprised. He reached for the folder, his fingers brushing the worn paper with a tenderness that made my throat tighten. Leo was a careful man. Too careful for his own good, maybe. But he knew what he was doing. "Did he tell you about the codicil, the one I read at the wedding?" A wry smile crossed his face. "I heard about that. My daughter's friend was at the reception. She called me before the cake was even cut." He set the folder down and met my eyes. "You handled it well." Leo would have been proud. "Thank you." I took a breath. "But there's more. The trust documents include a clause that lets me exercise voting rights if the family acts in bad faith. I think Mark's transfer triggered it. But I need to know, do you want to be part of this? You've stayed quiet for 30 years. I don't want to drag you into a fight you didn't ask for." Roger was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was softer than before. "Your father-in-law and I root that company with nothing but a handshake and a dream. He put up the money, I put up the hours. We built it brick by brick, and then Evelyn came along." He shook his head. "She was never happy with just being his wife. She wanted the company too. She wanted to run it, sell it, strip it for parts. Leo spent the last 10 years of his life trying to keep her from destroying what we'd made." He looked at me, and his eyes were tired but steady. "I stayed quiet because Leo asked me to. He said you'd be the one to fix things. So no, Lily, I'm not going to walk away now. Tell me what you need." I laid out the rest of the documents on the coffee table. The bank statements showing Evelyn's withdrawals. The partnership agreement with its careful clauses. The trust designation that made me the successor trustee. And the key to the safety deposit box, still from my pocket. "Here's what I'm proposing," I said. "Legally, you still hold the title to those private shares. I'm not asking you to transfer them to me, that would take too long, and Evelyn would challenge it. But I am asking you to exercise your voting rights in accordance with the trust. That means you'll vote with me on BOA-RD decisions, and you'll back me if I need to call a shareholder meeting." Roger leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "And what will you do with that power? Clean up the books. Stop the unauthorized withdrawals. Put someone in place who'll actually run the company instead of treating it like a personal bank account." I paused. "Mark can stay. He's not a bad person, he's just been manipulated his whole life. But his mother needs to be removed from any decision-making role." "And Mark agrees to this?" I shook my head. "Mark doesn't know I'm here. I'm not sure he knows about the partnership agreement at all. Evelyn may not even know about it. Leo kept it quiet for a reason." Roger sat back, his expression unreadable. You're planning to move without telling your husband. I'm planning to give him a chance to do the right thing. But I'm not going to wait for his permission. The older man studied me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. You sound just like him. Same conviction, same calm. He chose well. He extended his hand. I'll do it. But you need to understand something, this won't stay quiet for long. Evelyn will find out, and when she does, she'll fight. She's got money, she's got connections, and she's got a son who can't say no to her. You'll need more than a partnership agreement to win that war. I took his hand, shook it firmly. I know. But I've already route building the rest. The next few weeks were a blur of phone calls and meetings and fully drafted letters. Roger introduced me to a lawyer he trusted, a middle-aged woman named Patricia who'd handled business disputes for 3 decades and didn't read easily. She reviewed every document I'd brought, cross-referenced each clause with state law, and emerged from her office with a single sheet of paper covered in notes. The trust is solid, she said, pushing her glasses up her nose. The designation is legally binding, and the bad faith clause is broad enough to cover what Mark did. But there's a timing issue. The voting rights can't be exercised until you formally notify the other shareholders, including Evelyn, of your intent to act as successor trustee. How long does that take? 30 days. After that, if no one contests the designation, you can call a shareholder meeting and start making changes. She paused. But Evelyn will contest it. She'll hire the best lawyer she can afford, and she'll drag this out for as long as possible. You need to be ready for that. I am, I said, though I wasn't entirely sure it was true. I spent the next 2 weeks on the phone with Patricia, drafting the formal notification letter, reviewing options for the shareholder meeting, preparing counterarguments for every challenge Evelyn might raise. I also route calling my father-in-law's old contacts, the managers who'd worked for him for years, the suppliers who'd known him since the EARLY days, the financial advisors who'd watched him build the company from nothing. To my surprise, most of them were willing to talk to me. They'd heard about the wedding, of course, the story had spread through the business community like wildfire. But they'd also heard about my father-in-law's trust in me, and that carried more weight than I'd expected. He told me once that you were the only one who understood what the company meant to him, said a man named Frank, who'd managed the Wari house for 20 years. He said you'd know what to do when the time came. That was the phrase that kept coming back. When the time came. My father-in-law had planned for this moment, prepared for it, and now I was standing at the edge of a decision I'd never asked to make. The formal notification letter went out on a Friday. Patricia sent it via certified mail to every shareholder on record, including Evelyn and Mark. By Monday morning, my phone was ringing off the hook. Mark called first, his voice tight and strained. What is this, Lily? A trust? You never told me about any trust. I didn't know until after Dad died. He left the documents for me. He left them for you, not for me. His voice cracked. I'm his son. I'm supposed to run the company. Why would he, Mark? I kept my voice calm, though my heart was racing. He knew what was happening. He knew your mother was siphoning money from the company. He knew you'd go along with it because you always do. He didn't do this to punish you. He did it to protect the company. A long silence. Then, quieter, Mom says you're trying to steal the business. Your mother is the one who's been stealing from it for years. I have the bank statements to prove it. Another silence, longer this time. You're going to show those to people if I have to. But I'd rather not. I'd rather give you a chance to do the right thing. What's the right thing, Lily? Tell me what you want me to do. I'd been waiting for that question. Resign from the Boa Road. Let me bring in a professional manager to run the company until we can stabilize it. And stop letting your mother make decisions for you. He didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was barely audible. She'll never forgive me. She doesn't have to forgive you. She just has to stop being the one in charge. He hung up without saying goodbye, and I sat in my apartment for a long time, sta ring at the phone in my hands. Evelyn's response came 2 days later, via a letter delivered by courier to Patricia's office. It was formal, sharply worded, and full of legal threats. She was contesting the trust designation, questioning the validity of my father-in-law's signature, and demanding an immediate court hearing to block my appointment as successor trustee. Patricia called me after reading it. She's hired Gerald Haynes. He's the most expensive corporate litigator in the state. He'll try to tie this up in procedural motions for months. How long can she drag this out? Months. Maybe years, if she's willing to pay for it. A pause. But there's one thing she hasn't counted on. What's that? The partnership agreement. Roger's shares. If we can get him to call a shareholder meeting before the court hearing, we can vote to remove Evelyn from the board entirely. That would make her contestation irrelevant. She'd no longer have standing. But doesn't she own shares? She can't just be removed from the board if she's a shareholder. She can be removed from the board. She'll still own her shares, but she won't have any say in how the company is run. And without a board position, she can't call shareholder meetings or block our decisions. It was a drastic move, and I knew it would escalate the conflict. But I also knew Evelyn would never stop fighting if we didn't force her hand. I called Roger that evening. He listened to the plan in silence, then asked, "When?" "Tomorrow, if possible. I need you to call a meeting for next week. Short notice, so Evelyn won't have time to prepare." "Done. I'll make the calls tonight." He hung up, and I sat in the quiet of my apartment, the weight of what I'd set in motion pressing down on me. I was about to rip apart a family, my own family, the one I'd married into with such hope just a few months ago. But I couldn't let Evelyn win. Not when my father-in-law had trusted me to protect what he'd built. The meeting was scheduled for the following Thursday. Roger called it as the majority shareholder, exercising his voting rights under the partnership agreement. Evelyn was notified by email, and Patricia confirmed that she'd received it. The response was immediate and predictable. Her lawyer filed a motion to block the meeting, citing procedural irregularities and claiming Roger had no right to call a meeting without board approval. Patricia filed a counter-motion that same day, pointing out that the partnership agreement specifically gave Roger the authority to call meetings at any time, board approval or not. The court would rule on both motions in a preliminary hearing scheduled for the following week. So it was going to be a fight. I'd known that all along. But now the fight was on the public record, and there was no going back. I didn't sleep well that week. I spent my days on the phone with Patricia, reviewing documents, preparing arguments. I spent my evenings with my parents, who'd become my anchor through all of this. My mother had meals I barely touched, and my father sat beside me in silence, his hand resting on my shoulder like a silent promise. Mark called again a few days before the meeting. His voice was hollow, exhausted. "Mom's lawyer says you're trying to destroy the company. He says Roger Joe doesn't have the right to call a meeting. He says, Mark, do you believe that?" He paused. "I don't know what to believe anymore. You're my wife, but you're also the person who's about to take everything away from my mother." "I'm not taking anything away. I'm trying to stop her from taking everything away from everyone else. The company, the employees, the legacy your father spent his life building. She's been bleeding it dry for years, and you've let her. Don't put this all on me." His voice rose, and for the first time I heard a hint of anger. "You had secrets too. You had that trust, those documents. You never told me any of it. Because you would have told your mother. And she would have found a way to destroy them. He was silent. I'd hit a nerve, and I knew it. Lily, what happens after the meeting if you win? What happens to me? You keep your job, if you want it. You keep your salary, your title, your place in the company. But your mother steps back. She's done making decisions. And if I don't agree, then the court will decide. And I'll show them the bank statements. He hung up again, and I felt a lump in my throat that I refused to acknowledge as the meeting day arrived, and I walked into the conference room at Prosperity Holdings with Patricia on one side and Roger on the other. Evelyn was already there, flanked by Gerald Haynes and 2 junior associates. Mark sat at the end of the table, his face pale, his eyes fixed on the polished wood in front of him. Roger called the meeting to order, his voice calm and firm. He read the agenda: a vote to remove Evelyn from the board, a vote to appoint a professional manager, a vote to authorize an independent audit of the company's finances. Evelyn objected to every item, her lawyer rising to cite procedure, precedent, and propriety. Patricia countered each objection with quiet precision, citing the partnership agreement, the trust documents, and the bank statements I'd given her. The room was tense, the air thick with anger and fear. In the end, the votes were called. Roger Charez, combined with the other longtime managers who'd sided with me, ride the day. Evelyn was removed from the board. A new manager was appointed. The audit was authorized. Evelyn stood up so fast her chair scraped backway road. She read at the voting tally, then at me, her face a mask of fury and disbelief. You'll regret this, she said, her voice cold. You'll both regret this. She swept out of the room, Gerald Haynes trailing behind her. Mark rose, hesitated, looked at me with something that might have been regret or might have been anger. Was this the plan all along? He asked quietly. Me, get access to the company, and then take it all? No, I said, meeting his eyes. The plan was to you and build a life together. You're the one who changed the plan. He stood there for a long moment, then turned and walked out without another word. Roger put a hand on my shoulder. It's done. The hardest part is over. I looked at the empty chairs around the table, at the scattered papers and cold coffee cups. The hardest part was over, maybe. But the hardest part of my marriage was only just beginning. I gathered my things and walked out into the late afternoon sun, the weight of everything I'd done settling on my shoulders like a second skin. The days after the board meeting passed in a strange, suspended silence. I went back to my apartment, the same one I'd lived in before I married Mark, and I waited for the other shoe to drop. I knew Evelyn well enough to know she wouldn't retreat quietly. She'd lost the first battle, but she was already planning the second. My mother called every morning, her voice thin with worry. Are you eating? Have you heard from Mark? Your father says we should come stay with you for a while. Mom, I'm fine. Mark hasn't called. I don't expect him to. It's not right, a husband not calling his wife for 2 weeks. Even after everything, Mom. I softened my voice. He's hurting. I'm hurting. We need space. She made a sound that might have been agreement or might have been frustration, but she let it go. Patricia called the next week with news I'd been dreading. Evelyn had filed a lawsuit. The complaint was lengthy and dramatic, accusing me of fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, and undue influence over a dying man. She was asking the court to invalidate my appointment as successor trustee, void the partnership agreement with Roger, and her sole control over the company. She's throwing everything at the wall, Patricia said, her tone flat with professional assessment. None of it will stick, but it'll take time to dismiss. And in the meantime, she's going to make your life very difficult. How difficult. She's already sent a letter to every major vendor, warning them that the company's leadership is in dispute and advising them to put any new contracts on hold. She's also called the bank and tried to freeze the corporate accounts. Can she do that? She can try. The bank won't honor it without a court order, but it creates uncertainty. Vendors get nervous, orders get delayed, and the company starts bleeding money. I hung up and sat in the gray afternoon light, the weight of Evelyn's campaign pressing down on me. She wasn't fighting to win, she was fighting to destroy. And I wasn't sure I had the stamina to match her. Roger called that evening. His voice was calm, steady as a metronome. I've been through this before. Leo faced the same tactics from her a dozen times. She'll burn bright for a while, then she'll run out of fuel. The key is to outlast her. How long did it take before, when Leo fought her? Roger paused. Yeah, sometimes. But Leo had one thing you don't have. What's that? He didn't love her. He'd stopped loving her long before the fight's root. You still love Mark. That's going to make this harder. I didn't deny it. I couldn't. Root going to the office regularly, sitting in a borrowed conference room with Patricia and the new manager we'd appointed, a quiet man named Arthur who'd run a mid-sized manufacturing firm for 15 years. Arthur was methodical, unflappable, and entirely uninterested in the family drama. He looked at the company's books, shook his head at the state of the accounts, and Root making a list of everything that needed fixing. The withdrawals you flagged, the ones Evelyn authorized, they're going to create a cash flow problem, he told me one afternoon, pushing a spreadsheet across the table. We've got suppliers who haven't been paid in 90 days. We've got outstanding loans that are coming due. And we've got a legal battle that's going to eat up every dollar we have if we don't find a way to cut costs. Can we negotiate with the vendors, extend the terms? Some of them. The ones who've been with the company for years. But the new ones, the ones Evelyn brought in, they're going to demand payment up front. They know we're in trouble. I spent the next week on the phone, calling every vendor I could reach. Most of them recognized my name, the story of the wedding had spread, and the news of the board meeting had only added fuel. Some were sympathetic, willing to extend terms or negotiate partial payments. Others were cold, unwilling to take risks on a company in turmoil. It was exhausting work, and I came home each night with my voice hoarse and my head pounding. But I kept going, because I knew that if I stopped, Evelyn would have won. Then Mark showed up at my apartment. It was a Thursday evening, the sky dark with rain. I opened the door to find him standing in the hallway, soaking wet, his tie undone and his eyes red-rimmed. I'm sorry, he said, before I could speak. I should have called. I should have done a lot of things differently. Can I come in? I stepped aside. He walked past me into the small living room, trailing water on the hardwood floor, and stood in the middle of the room like he didn't know where to put himself. I've been staying with a friend, he said. I couldn't go back to the house. Too many memories. Too much, everything. Mark, why are you here? He turned to face me, and for the first time, I saw something other than anger or confusion in his eyes. I saw grief, raw and unreserved. Mom called me today. She said she's going to take this to trial. She said she's going to fight you until you have nothing left. And I realized, he stopped, swallowed. I realized I don't want to be part of that. I don't want to watch my mother destroy the only thing Dad ever really read about. And I don't want to lose you. Mark. I crossed my arms, though I wasn't sure if I was protecting myself or trying to stay steady. You already lost me. The moment you stood up at our wedding and read that speech, you made a choice. I know. His voice cracked. I know, and I've been trying to undo it ever since. But I can't undo it. I can't go back. All I can do is try to move four-way road. Four-way RD to what he moved closer, his hands outstretched like he wanted to touch me but wasn't sure he was allowed. I'll do whatever you need. I'll resign from the BOA road. I'll testify against Mom if you want. I'll tell the court everything I know about the money she took, the deals she made, the way she tried to control Dad. ISTA read at him, searching for signs of manipulation, trying to see if this was another performance, another script his mother had written. But his eyes held steady, and his hands were shaking. Why now? I asked. What changed? Because Mom called me tonight, he said. And I realized she's never going to stop. She's going to keep fighting, and she's going to keep using me as her weapon. I don't want to be her weapon anymore. I want to be something else. He paused. I want to be someone you can look at without feeling sick. I didn't answer. I couldn't. Because his words had taken something inside me and turned it upside down. You should leave, I said finally. I need to think. He nodded, turned, and walked to the door. He paused with his hand on the handle. I'll be in the city for the next few days. At the Miller Road Hotel. If you want to talk again, just call. Then he was gone, the door clicking shut behind him, and I stood in the middle of my APA wondering if I'd just made a terrible mistake. Roger called me EARLY the next morning. He RD from Patricia about MAR case offered to testify, and he wanted to talk. I've seen this happen before, he said ruefully. The son, torn between mother and wife. It doesn't usually end well for anyone. What do you think I should do? Trust him, but don't rely on him. Let him do what he's offering, but keep your own plans in place. If he follows through, great. If he changes his mind, you'll still have a path four-way road. It was practical advice, and I knew he was right. But practical didn't make it easy. I met Mark the next day at a quiet cafe near the hotel. He looked better than he had at my APA, shaved, dressed properly, steady. But there was a wariness in his eyes that hadn't been there before, a guaridness that matched my own. I talked to Patricia, he said, as soon as I sat down. She said the trial could drag on for months. She said your legal fees are going to be substantial. I can help with that. I have accounts of my own, savings my mother doesn't know about. Mark, that's not why I'm here. I know. But I want to help. I need to help. I studied him across the table, looking for any trace of the man who'd stood at the altar and made me feel like a stranger in my own wedding. He was still the same person, but something had shifted. Maybe it was the weight of what he'd lost. Maybe it was the realization that his mother couldn't fix everything. The trial, I said ruefully. If it goes four-way RD, you'll have to testify against your mother. Publicly. Under oath. She'll never forgive you. I know. Are you sure you can do that? He met my eyes. I can do it because it's the right thing. And because I need to prove to you, and maybe to myself, that I'm not just her puppet. I didn't say anything for a long moment. Then I nodded. Okay. Let's start with that. The days that followed were a blur of preparation. Mark signed affidavits, handed over financial documents, and met with Patricia multiple times to go over his testimony. He did it all without complaint, without hesitation, and I root to believe that maybe he really had changed. But Evelyn hadn't stopped fighting. She filed motions to block Mark's testimony, arguing that a husband couldn't testify against his mother without privilege. The court denied the motions. She tried to have Patricia removed from the case, claiming a conflict of interest. The court denied that too. She threw everything she had at the legal system, and each time she was rebuffed. Then, a month before the trial, the first real surprise came. A man named Daniel showed up at the company offices, a messenger bag slung over his shoulder and an expression of nervous resolve. He was in his late 40s, wearing a suit that had seen better days, and he asked to speak to me privately. Arthur brought him to my office, which was really just a borrowed conference room with a temporary sign on the door. Daniel sat down, pulled a file from his bag, and laid it on the table. "You don't know me," he said. "But your father-in-law knew my father. They were friends for many years, and when my father passed, Leo, Mr. Chen, he helped me out a few times. Gave me work when I needed it, loaned me money when I was in trouble. I owe him a lot." "What's this about?" Daniel pushed the file toward me. "I heard about the lawsuit. I heard about Evelyn. And I realized I have something that might help you." I opened the file. Inside was a series of documents, contracts, payment records, and a handwritten letter from my father-in-law. The letter was dated 5 years ago, and it described a conversation between Leo and Evelyn that Daniel's father had witnessed and documented. The conversation was about the company's accounts, about Evelyn's plan to transfer money into her own name, and about the threats she'd made if Leo tried to stop her. "Your father-in-law asked my father to hold on to these," Daniel said. "He said if anything ever happened to him, they might be needed. My father kept them all these years, and when he died, I found them. I didn't know what to do with them until I heard about your case." I read the letter twice, then looked up at Daniel. "Do you realize what this is? A full record of her threats. The timeline matches the bank statements you already have. It proves she wasn't just taking money, she was blackmailing him." I closed the file and held it against my chest. "Thank you. This changes everything." That afternoon, Patricia called me with a voice that almost sounded relieved. "With this letter, we have enough to ask for summary judgment. We can skip the trial entirely. Will the court grant it?" "Given the evidence we now have, yes. Evelyn can't contest the facts if we can prove them conclusively. We'll file the motion this week." I sat in the quiet of my borrowed office, the letter in my hands. Roger was right. Leo had been planning for this moment for years. He'd planted evidence in 3 different places: the safety deposit box, the partnership agreement, and now the record kept by a friend's son. He'd built a fortress around his legacy, and he'd given me the keys. The motion for summary judgment was filed, and Evelyn's legal team had 30 days to respond. They tried to challenge the letter's authenticity, but Daniel provided sworn affidavits, and the handwriting matched Leo's known signatures. They tried to argue that the letter had been taken out of context, but Patricia produced the rest of the file, which included payment records and contracts that corroborated every detail. 2 weeks before the hearing, Evelyn's lawyer called Patricia with an offer. Evelyn was willing to settle. She'd step down from any involvement in the company, accept a buyout for her remaining shares, and drop all legal claims. In exchange, she wanted a public statement from me that I'd never falsely accused her of criminal activity. I called Roger, then Patricia, then Mark. We talked for hours, weighing the options. A settlement would end the fight quickly, sparing the company more legal fees and giving everyone a chance to move on. But it would also mean that Evelyn got paid for her years of stealing and manipulation. In the end, I made the decision myself. I offered a counter-proposal. Evelyn could take a reduced buyout, one that reflected the actual value of her shares without the amounts she'd stolen. She could keep her dignity, but she wouldn't get rewarded for her actions. Her lawyer accepted. The day the settlement was finalized, I sat in my apartment with the windows open and the spring sun pouring in. Mark called, his voice quiet. "It's over." "It's over," I agreed. "Can we try?" he asked. "Can we try to rebuild something?" I thought about it for a long time. I thought about all the trust that had been broken, all the words that had been said and couldn't be unsaid. I thought about my father-in-law's letter, the one that had predicted everything that had happened. I don't know, I told Mark, I need time. A lot of time. He accepted that, and we hung up. I sat in the sun for a while longer, watching dust motes dance in the light. The fight was over, and I'd won. But the victory felt hollow, because I'd lost so much along the way. The settlement papers were signed on a Tuesday morning, the kind of gray, drizzly day that made everything feel muted and distant. Patricia handed me the final copies across her conference table, her expression fully neutral, and I signed my name without reading the fine print for the 100th time. It's done, Patricia said. She's out. The company is yours to run however you see fit. I looked at the ink drying on the paper and felt nothing. No triumph, no relief, no satisfaction. Just a strange, hollow quiet where all the fight had been. Mark was waiting for me in the lobby of Patricia's building. He'd driven me to the meeting, something that had become a habit in the weeks since he'd come to my apartment. We didn't talk much on the drive back to my place. The silence wasn't awkward, it was just tired, worn out from too many months of babbled. I'm going to see my mother this afternoon, he said, as he pulled up to the curb. I need to tell her in person that I'm staying with you. Staying with me. He turned off the engine and faced me, his hands still on the wheel. I know you said you needed time. And I'm not asking for anything. But I want you to know that I've made my choice. I'm not going back to her. I'm not going to let her run my life anymore. I looked at him, this man I'd married, this man I'd watched fold under his mother's pressure again and again. He looked different now, older, maybe, or just more certain. The hesitation that had always hovered around his edges had faded into something steadier. Mark, you don't have to prove anything to me. I know. But I have to prove it to myself. He reached out, and I let him take my hand. His fingers were rough with nervous tension. I've spent my whole life doing what she wanted. Being what she wanted. And it made me miserable, but I didn't know how to stop. You showed me there was another way. I squeezed his hand, just once, then let go. Go see your mother. Call me after. He nodded, and I got out of the car, walking up the steps to my apartment without looking back. The first call came 2 hours later, while I was ring at a half-finished spreadsheet on my laptop. Mark's voice was strained, but not angry. She didn't take it well. She said I was betraying her, that you'd turned me against her, that I'd regret this for the rest of my life. What did you say? I said I already regretted the things I'd done because of her. I said I was done being her puppet. A pause. She threw a vase at me. Missed, but it was close. Are you okay? I'm fine. I left before she could find something heavier. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. That took courage, Mark. I know it wasn't easy. It wasn't. But it was necessary. Another pause, shorter this time. Can I see you tonight? I don't want to be alone. I hesitated. The old reflex, the one that told me to keep my distance, to protect myself, was still there. But I remembered Roger's words, trust him, but don't rely on him, and I realized I'd been doing the opposite. I'd been holding him at arm's length, waiting for him to fail. Come over around 7, I said. I'll make dinner. He arrived with a bottle of wine, the kind we drank at our engagement dinner, and a bouquet of white peonies that looked exactly like the ones I'd see ride down the aisle. I took them without comment, put them in a vase on the kitchen counter, and let him into my small, cluttered apartment. We ate in the living room, sitting cross-legged on the floor because my dining table was covered in papers. He told me about his afternoon, the confrontation with his mother, the long drive back to the city. I told him about the settlement, about Patricia's full neutrality, about the strange emptiness that had settled over me. I thought I'd feel different, I admitted. Once it was over, I thought I'd be relieved. You know. I poked at the pasta on my plate. I'm just tired. And I keep thinking about your father. About how much he planned, how much he knew. I feel like I'm writing something I didn't ask for. Mark was quiet for a moment. Then he set down his fork and looked at me, his eyes steady. Dad was a planner. He always had a backup plan and a backup for the backup. But he wasn't just protecting the company. He was protecting me. He knew I wasn't strong enough to stand up to Mom on my own. He had a lot of faith in me. He had faith in the right person. He reached across the space between us, his hand hovering uncertainly over mine. Lily, I know I have a long way to go. I know I hurt you, and I know I can't undo that. But I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to be someone you can trust again. I didn't pull my hand away. I let his fingers rest on mine, and tentative. That night, after he'd gone home, I sat in the dark and thought about my father-in-law's letter. He'd written that I'd know what to do when the time came, and I'd spent months trying to figure out what that meant. Maybe it wasn't about winning the lawsuit or taking control of the company. Maybe it was about something simpler, learning to forgive someone who'd let you down, and learning to let yourself be vulnerable again. The next few weeks were quiet. The legal battles were over, and the company was slowly stabilizing under Arthur's steady hand. Mark and I root seeing each other regular dinners, walks in the park, long conversations that stretched into the hours of the morning. He was reeful with me, respectful of my boundary rise, and I found myself relaxing in ways I hadn't expected. But Evelyn hadn't read entirely. I heard through the grapevine that she'd moved to a smaller house on the outskirts of the city, and that she'd root spending more time with her old social circle, women who'd never liked me, who'd always whispered behind their hands about the outsider who'd more right into the family. She was keeping a low profile, which was smart. But I knew her well enough to know she was just waiting for another opening. Roger called one afternoon with news that surprised me. I got a call from your mother-in-law's lawyer. She's asking for a meeting. A private one, just you and her. She wants to meet with me after everything. She says she wants to talk. Clea are the heir. I told her you'd think about it. I did think about it. For 3 days, I turned the question over in my mind, weighing the risks and benefits. Part of me wanted to say no, to protect myself from another round of her manipulation. But another part of me, the part that wanted closure, wanted to hear what she had to say. Mark was skeptical when I told him. She's not going to apologize. She doesn't know how. Maybe not. But I'll never know unless I go. I'll come with you. No. I touched his arm. This is between me and her. I need to do it alone. We met at a hotel cafe, neutral ground, far from the company offices and the house she'd once ruled. She arrived dressed in a simple navy dress that made her look older than she had at the wedding. Her hair was grayer, her face more lined, and there was a weariness in her eyes that I hadn't seen before. Thank you for coming, she said, and her voice was softer than I remembered. I know you didn't have to. No, I agreed. I didn't. She folded her hands on the table, and for a long moment, she didn't speak. Then, slowly, she began. I was wrong about you. I've been wrong about a lot of things. Leo, he tried to tell me, but I wouldn't listen. I thought he was just being sentimental, that he'd fallen for your the way Mark had. I didn't see how smart you were, how capable. I only saw a threat. That's what I was to you, a threat to everything I'd built. To my place in the family, to my son's loyalty, to the life I'd worked so hard to create. She paused, and when she continued, her voice was bitter. I came from nothing. Did Leo ever tell you that my parents were poor, and I married him because he was the first man who could give me security? And I spent my whole life terrified that someone would take it away. I watched her, and something shifted in my chest. Not sympathy, I wasn't ready for that, but understanding. I saw the fear behind her anger, the desperation behind her cruelty. I'm not going to apologize, she said, lifting her chin. You're not going to forgive me. But I want you to know that I see you now. I see what Leo saw. And I'm sorry that I couldn't see it sooner. She stood, leaving the coffee untouched, and walked out of the cafe without looking back. I sat there for a long time, staring at her empty chair. It wasn't absolution. It wasn't reconciliation. But it was something, a crack in the wall she'd built around herself. And for now, that was enough. The months that followed were quieter. The company stabilized, our third CA refill management paying off in steady profits and improved morale. Mark and I continued our CA refill dance, learning to be around each other without the weight of the past pressing down on us. He moved into a small apartment of his own, a few blocks from mine, and we fell into a rhythm that felt almost normal. But I wasn't ready to move back in with him. Not yet. There was still a part of me that held back, that remembered the man who'd stood at the altar and chosen his mother over me. I told myself it was just time, that I needed to rebuild trust slowly. But in my quieter moments, I wondered if I'd ever be able to trust anyone again. Roger called me one evening, his voice warm with approval. Evelyn asked to meet with you. That took courage, on both sides. It wasn't easy. But I'm glad I did it. Good. That's how healing starts. With small steps, in unexpected places. He paused. You know, Leo and I used to argue about the future. I wanted to sell the company when we were both still young enough to enjoy the money. He wanted to build something lasting. I thought he was being a dreamer. A soft laugh. Turns out he was just more patient than I was. He knew the right person would come along. I'm not sure I was the right person. I just happened to be there. Leo was a lot of things, a dreamer, a planner, a fighter. But he was never wrong about people. If he trusted you, it was because he knew what you were capable of. And he was right. I hung up the phone and sat in the quiet of my apartment, thinking about legacy and trust and the long, slow work of forgiveness. The air turned, and spring came again. Mark and I roots spending weekends together, taking drives out to the countryside, visiting the small towns where he'd grown up. He told me stories about his childhood, about the father who'd been too busy to play catch and the mother who'd filled every silence with demands. He told me about the guilt he'd see ride, the need to please her that had never quite faded. I don't want to be like that anymore, he said one afternoon, as we sat on a park bench watching the sunlight filter through the leaves. I want to be someone who chooses the people he loves, not someone who just avoids conflict. Mark. I turned to face him. I've been thinking about something. About us. He tensed, bracing himself for bad news. I'm not ready to move back in together. I'm not sure I'll ever be ready. But I'm ready to stop punishing you for what happened. I'm ready to try. He let out a breath he'd been holding for a year. That's more than I deserve. Maybe. But it's what I want. He took my hand, and this time I didn't pull away. We sat in the quiet of the park, the sun warm on our faces, and I felt something shift in my chest, a loosening of the knot I'd been seeing since the wedding day. It wasn't resolution. It wasn't a happy ending, not yet. But it was a beginning. And for now, that was enough. Spring melted into summer, and the city began to feel like home again. I'd spent so many months bracing for the next blow, waiting for Evelyn to surface with another legal salvo or another whispered campaign, but the silence held. She'd retreated to her new house, her old circle of friends, her fully curated life, and she'd left the rest of us alone. Mark and I settled into a strange, tentative rhythm. We saw each other most evenings, shared meals, talked about our days. He'd root working with Arthur on a new project, a community outreach program that would bring small manufacturing jobs back to the neighborhoods where the company had first root. It was the kind of thing his father would have approved of, the kind of thing that gave Mark a purpose beyond just keeping his mother happy. He's been different lately, Arthur told me one afternoon, over coffee in his cluttered office. More focused. Less anxious. I think he's finally found something he actually wants to do. He always wanted to do good. He just didn't know how to separate that from what his mother wanted. Arthur nodded, his expression thoughtful. Well, he's figuring it out now. And I've got to say, it's been a relief. I was worried we'd lose him to the bitterness. I understood that worry. I'd lived it myself. But even as things stabilized, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still unresolved. The lawsuit was over, the settlement was final, and Evelyn had retreated. But I hadn't fully claimed my own place in the world. I was still living in my small apartment, still holding myself back from the life I'd once imagined with Mark. Roger invited me to dinner one evening, a quiet meal at his house with his daughter and her family. It was a unpretentious gathering, the kind of evening I'd already experienced with my in-laws, where the conversation flowed easily and no one was keeping score. You've been quiet tonight, Roger said, as I helped him see RRY dishes to the kitchen. Something on your mind just thinking about what comes next. The company's stable, the legal battles are over, and Mark and I are slowly finding our way back to each other. But I don't know what I'm supposed to do with myself. He set down a stack of plates and turned to face me. You're waiting for the other shoe to drop. I know the feeling. It took me years after Leo died to stop looking over my shoulder. Did it ever go away? It faded. And eventually, I realized that the best way to stop waiting for bad things to happen was to start making good things happen. He smiled. You've got a second chance, Lily. Not with the company or with Mark, with yourself. What do you want to do with it? The question stayed with me for days. I thought about it during my walks to the office, during my quiet evenings alone, during my conversations with Mark and my parents and the few friends I'd managed to keep close through all the chaos. What did I want? The answer came slowly, in pieces. I'd trained as a lawyer, but I'd never loved the practice of it. What I'd loved was the problem solving, the way each case was a puzzle to be untangled. I'd loved helping people navigate systems they didn't understand. And I'd loved my father-in-law's company, not for the money or the power, but for the way it provided stability to hundreds of families. One evening, over dinner with Mark, I brought it up. What would you think about me rooting a foundation? Something separate from the company, focused on supporting small businesses in the communities where we operate. Mark looked up from his plate, surprised. A foundation? That's a lot of work. I know. But I've been thinking about it for a while. Your father's company helped so many people over the years, but it always felt like something that happened to them, not something they were part of. I want to create something different. Something that helps people build their own futures. He was quiet for a moment. Then he smiled, a real smile, the kind I hadn't seen in months. I think that's the best idea you've had in a long time. The foundation took shape over the summer. I root with a small team, a financial planner, a community outreach coordinator, a legal advisor who'd worked with Patricia on some pro bono cases. We developed a plan to offer small loans and mentorship to local entrepreneurs, with a focus on women and people from underrepresented communities. It was modest, but it felt right. Mark threw himself into the project with an enthusiasm I hadn't seen since we'd first met. He helped with the outreach, using his connections in the business community to spread the word. He came to the initial meetings, offered advice on the logistics, and stayed late to help me organize the paperwork. "This is what I should have been doing all along," he said one evening, as we sat in my apartment sorting through applications. "Instead of just trying to keep things the way they were. Things change, Mark. That's not a bad thing." "I know. I'm just sorry it took so long for me to figure that out." I looked at him across the pile of papers, and I felt something shift. Not the old, anxious for I'd ride for so long. Something softer, more hopeful. The foundation held its first open meeting on a September evening, in a community center on the east side of the city. 27 people showed up, a mix of hopeful entrepreneurs and curious neighbors. I gave a short speech about what we were trying to do, not charity, not handouts, but partnerships with people who had the drive and the ideas but needed a little help getting sta root. After the meeting, a woman came up to me, her eyes bright with excitement. "I've been trying to start a catering business for 3 years, she said. "But I couldn't get a loan anywhere. My credit isn't perfect, and I don't have collateral. Your program, it could be exactly what I need." I took her contact information and promised to be in touch. As she walked away, I felt a warmth spread through me that had nothing to do with the balmy evening air. This was what my father-in-law had seen in me, I realized. Not just the ability to fight, but the willingness to build. Mark was waiting for me outside the community center, leaning against the railing of the steps. "How did it go better than I expected?" "There's real need out there. And real talent." He nodded, falling into step beside me as we walked to the car. "You know, when I first met you, I thought you were just another lawyer, another person who'd talk a big game and never follow through. I was wrong. Mark, that was years ago. We've been through too much for you to still be apologizing." "I'm not apologizing. I'm just saying, I see you now. The real you. And I like who I see." It was a small thing, a simple thing. But it settled in my chest like a promise. The foundation's first loan was approved in October, to a woman named Rosa who wanted to open a bakery in her neighborhood. The loan was modest, enough to cover equipment and rent for the first 6 months. We connected her with a mentor, a retired baker who'd run his own shop for 30 years, and we watched as her dream began to take shape. Rosa's bakery opened in November, and the smell of fresh bread filled the block. I visited on opening day, bought a loaf of sourdough, and sat on a bench across the street, watching the line of customers stretch out the door. Mark found me there, a cup of coffee in each hand. He sat down beside me and handed me a cup. "You did this," he said. "We did this. You helped. I helped with the paperwork. You made it happen." He took a sip of his coffee and read at the bakery. "I used to think that the only way to succeed was to hold on tight to what you had. That's what my mother taught me. But you've shown me something different. What's that? Sometimes the best way to hold on to something is to share it." I leaned against his shoulder, feeling the warmth of the sun and the quiet hum of the street. It wasn't a perfect day. There was still traffic noise, still the distant wail of a siren, still the ache of all that had gone wrong. But it felt whole in a way I hadn't felt in a long time. The foundation continued to grow, slowly and steadily. We funded a second business, then a third. We hosted workshops on budgeting and marketing and business planning. We built relationships with local banks and community leaders, creating a network that would outlast any single person's involvement. Roger came to one of the workshops, sitting in the back row with a contented smile on his face. After we rode, he pulled me aside. "Leo would have been proud of you," he said. "This is exactly what he wanted. Not just to save the company, but to create something that would keep giving. I'm not sure I've done anything special. I just saw a need and tried to fill it. That's what special people do. He squeezed my arm. I'm proud of you too, Lily. And I'm grateful you came into our lives. I blinked back the unexpected sting of TRS. Thank you, Roger. That means more than you know. As the year drew to a close, I found myself reflecting on everything that had happened. The wedding, the betrayal, the fight, the slow, painful process of rebuilding. I'd lost my faith in Mark, in his mother, in the family I'd married into. But I'd found something else, a sense of purpose that wasn't tied to any of them. Mark and I still weren't living together. We were still navigating the refill dance of trust and time. But I'd stopped waiting for the other shoe to drop. I'd rued living again, not in the shadow of what had happened, but in the light of what could be. One evening, as we sat in my apartment watching the snow fall outside the window, Mark turned to me with an expression I hadn't seen before. Lily, I know I've said this before. But I want to say it again. I'm sorry for everything I put you through. For the wedding, for my mother, for not standing up when I should have. I'm sorry for all of it. Mark, I know. Let me finish. He took my hand, his fingers warm and steady. I'm not just saying it because I want you to forgive me. I'm saying it because I need you to know that I understand. Finally, after all this time, I understand what I did wrong. And I'm going to spend the rest of my life making it right. I looked at him, this man who'd failed me in the worst possible way and then spent a year trying to earn his way back. I still couldn't promise him forever. But I could promise him today. I know you understand, Mark. And I appreciate it. Let's just take it one day at a time, okay? He nodded, and we sat together in the quiet, watching the snow fall. The year ended with a party at the Foundation's office, a small gathering of staff, volunteers, and the entrepreneurs we'd helped. Rosa brought her sourdough and a tray of pastries. Another business owner donated coffee and tea. The room was warm with laughter and conversation, the kind of easy camaraderie that came from shared purpose. I stood in the corner, watching it all, and felt something I hadn't felt in months. Contentment. Not joy, not triumph, just a quiet, steady sense that I was exactly where I was supposed to be. Mark came up beside me, a cup of punch in his hand. You look happy. I think I am. I turned to him, and for the first time in a long time, I let myself truly see him. Thank you for being here. Thank you for letting me. We stood together, watching the party unfold, and I thought about the future. It wasn't going to be easy. There would be challenges, setbacks, moments when I doubted everything I'd built. But I knew now that I could handle them. I'd handled worse. The foundation was a START, Mark was a START. And I was finally ready to believe that STARTs mattered more than endings. The winter snows melted, and spring returned to the city with the kind of quiet persistence that felt like hope. The foundation had grown beyond anything I'd imagined when I first sketched out the idea on a napkin in Roger's kitchen. We'd funded 17 small businesses, hosted 12 workshops, and built a network of mentors and volunteers who believed in the same thing I did, that people deserved a chance to build their own futures. Mark and I had fallen into a pattern that felt almost natural. He came to the foundation's events, helped with the paperwork, and offered advice when I asked for it. He'd stopped hovering, stopped apologizing for things that had already been forgiven, and rude simply being present. It was a small change, but it made all the difference. One evening, as we walked through the park near my apartment, he stopped in the middle of the path and turned to face me. I've been thinking about something, he said. And I want to ask you, but I need you to know that you can say no. You can say no and nothing will change between us. I felt a flicker of wariness, the old reflex that still surfaced when he got too serious. What is it? I want to buy a house. Not a big one, not anything like what my mother had. Just a small place with a garden, a place where we could actually settle. Together. He paused, sea urching my face. Not right away. Not even soon. But I want to know if that's something you could imagine. Someday. I looked at him standing there, his hands shoved in his pockets, his expression a mix of hope and fear. He'd changed so much in the past year. The hesitation that had once defined him had softened into patience. The fear that had driven him to please his mother had transformed into a willingness to stand on his own. Mark, I'm not ready to say yes to that. But I'm not saying no either. He nodded, a small smile flickering at the corners of his mouth. That's more than I hoped for. We continued walking, and I let myself imagine what he described. A small house, a garden, a life that wasn't defined by the battles we'd fought. It was a nice picture. And for the first time, I let myself believe it might be possible that the foundation hit a milestone that spring, our 100th loan applicant. It was a woman named Maria, a single mother of 2 who wanted to start a home cleaning service. She had the drive, the skills, and the determination, but no one would give her a chance. We approved her loan on a Friday afternoon, and I drove home with a lightness in my chest that I hadn't felt in years. That weekend, my mother called with news that made my heart stop. Evelyn's in the hospital. She had a stroke, a bad one. They don't know if she's going to make it. I sat down on my couch, the phone pressed to my ear, my mind spinning. When did this happen? Yesterday. Mark's already there. He called your father to let us know. My mother paused, her voice softening. I know she wasn't good to you, Lily. But she's still his mother. I know, Mom. I'll go. I found Mark in the hospital waiting room, his head in his hands, his shoulders shaking with quiet sobs. I sat down beside him and put my hand on his back. She's in surgery, he said, his voice muffled. They don't know if she's going to make it. I keep thinking about all the things I never said to her. All the things I wanted to say, but I was too angry. Mark, you don't have to say anything to anyone. Just be here. That's enough. He turned to me, his eyes red and swollen. I know she was terrible to you. I know she made your life hell. But she was still my mother, and I keep remembering the way she used to be. Before she became so bitter. Before the money and the power changed her. I held his hand and let him talk, let him remember the mother he'd lost long before the stroke. And somewhere in that quiet hospital room, I felt something shift. Not forgiveness, not yet. But understanding that Evelyn survived the surgery, but she was changed. The stroke had affected her speech and mobility, and she would need months of rehabilitation. Mark visited her every day, sitting by her bedside, talking to her even when she couldn't respond. She was released from the hospital in early summer, to a rehabilitation facility that specialized in stroke recovery. I went with Mark to visit her one afternoon, not sure what I expected to feel. She was sitting in a wheelchair by the window, her thin fingers wrapped around a cup of water. Her face had aged a decade in the months since the stroke, her eyes clouded with confusion and something that might have been regret. Thank you for coming, she said, her voice slow and halting. I know I don't deserve it. Evelyn, I didn't come because of what you deserve. I came because Mark asked me to. She nodded slowly, her gaze dropping to her hands. I've had a lot of time to think. About everything. About the things I did. The things I said. She looked up at me, and for the first time, I saw no anger in her eyes. Just exhaustion. I was wrong about you. I was wrong about a lot of things. Evelyn, you don't have to, I do. She cut me off with a wave of her hand, a ghost of her old imperiousness. I want to say it. I want you to hear it. I was wrong. And I'm sorry. The apology sat in the air between us, fragile and unexpected. I didn't know what to do with it, so I just nodded. Thank you, I said. I appreciate that. She nodded, and we sat in silence for a while, the only sounds the distant hum of the facility's heating system and the soft whistle of Mark's breath. That evening, Mark and I walked along the river, the summer sun low and warm on our faces. He was quieter than usual, but there was a peace in his silence that hadn't been there before. She apologized to you, he said finally. I never thought I'd see that. Neither did I. But I think she meant it. She did. She's been different since the stroke. More reflective. More honest. He paused. It's hard to see her like this. But in some ways, it's also been a gift. I finally got to say the things I'd been holding on to for years. What did you say? Just that I loved her. And that I was sorry we'd spent so much time fighting. He looked at me, his eyes soft. I'm not sorry I stood up to her. I'm sorry I waited so long. I took his hand, feeling the warmth of his palm against mine. We all wait too long for some things. The important thing is that we eventually do them. He squeezed my hand, and we walked on in comfortable silence. The summer passed in a blur of foundation work, hospital visits, and slow, refill healing. Evelyn's recovery was steady, though she'd never be the same. Mark and I found a rhythm that worked for us: separate appointments, charrette evenings, the occasional weekend trip to the countryside. We weren't rushing toward anything, and for the first time, that felt right. In August, Roger invited me to lunch at a small diner near his house. He looked well, his eyes bright and his hand steady as he poured tea from a ceramic pot. I've been thinking about retiring, he said, setting down the teapot. For real this time. Selling my charrette, moving to the coast, finally taking that fishing trip I've been promising myself for 30 years. Roger, you can't just leave. You're the heart of this company. He laughed, a warm, genuine sound. The company's got a new heart now. You. And Arthur. And Mark, in his own way. He reached across the table and patted my hand. I've done what I set out to do. I kept Leo's dream alive. And now I'm ready to let someone else see it. I didn't argue. I understood what he was saying. There comes a time when you've given all you can, and it's okay to step back and let others take over. I'll miss you, I said. I'll be a phone call away. And I'll be back for the Foundation's next gala. He smiled. You've built something beautiful, Lily. Don't ever forget that. We finished our meal, and I drove home with the windows down and the warm summer air rushing through the car. The future was still uncertain, still full of unanswered questions. But for the first time in a long time, I was ready to face it. Mark called that evening, his voice light with excitement. I found it. The house I was telling you about. I went to see it today, and it's perfect. Small, a little old, but it has this garden in the back with an apple tree. I don't know if you'd want to see it, but, Mark. I cut him off gently. I'd like to see it. He was quiet for a moment, surprised. Really. I'm not promising anything. But I'd like to see it. We met at the house the next morning, a small craftsman cottage on a quiet street lined with sycamores. The garden was overgrown, the paint was peeling, and the kitchen cabinets were old and worn. But I could see it, the potential, the possibilities, the life we could build there. What do you think? Mark asked, his voice refully neutral. I walked to the back window and looked out at the apple tree, its branches heavy with fruit. I think it needs a lot of work. It does. But I'm not afraid of work. I turned to face him. Neither am I. For the first time, I'm not afraid of a lot of things. He crossed the room and took my hands. We don't have to decide anything today. We don't have to decide anything for months. But I wanted you to see it. I wanted you to know that this is what I'm working toward. A future with you. I looked at him, at this man who'd failed me and fought for me and changed in ways I'd never expected. I thought about the wedding, the betrayal, the long, slow journey back to trust. I thought about my father-in-law's letter, his faith in me, his belief that I'd know what to do when the time came. The time had come. Mark, I can't promise you forever. But I can promise you today. And I can promise you that I'll keep showing up. That's all I ever wanted. He pulled me into an embrace, warm and steady, and I let myself lean into it. We bought the house in the fall, a joint venture that felt more like a commitment than any wedding vow had ever been. We painted the walls, planted new flowers in the garden, and spent weekends fixing the things that needed fixing. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours. Evelyn came to see it once, near the end of the hour. She was using a walker now, her movements slow and deliberate, but her eyes were clear and her voice was steadied. It's a nice house, she said, looking around the living room. Small, but nice. Thank you. I offered her tea, and she accepted, sitting refully on the couch. I've been thinking, she said, her gaze fixed on the garden window. About all the things I did wrong. All the ways I pushed people away. I spent so much time trying to hold on to things that I didn't realize I was losing the things that mattered most. Evelyn, let me finish. She held up a hand. I know I can't undo what I did. I know I can't take back all the hurt I caused. But I want you to know that I see it now. I see what I did, and I'm sorry. She looked at me, her eyes wet with tears. I'm sorry for everything. I sat down beside her and took her hand. It was thin and fragile, so different from the iron grip she'd once had. I forgive you, I said, and I meant it. The new year came, and with it, a sense of peace I'd never expected to find. Mark and I settled into the house, into the rhythm of shaw-read mornings and quiet evenings, into a life that felt more real than anything we'd had before. The foundation continued to grow, and I poured myself into it with a joy that surprised me. Rose's bakery had expanded to a second location. Ria's cleaning service had grown to 20 employees. Dozens of other entrepreneurs had found their footing, each one a testament to the power of second chances. One afternoon, I received a letter from an address I didn't recognize. I opened it to find a photograph of my father-in-law, young and smiling, standing in front of the first factory he'd ever built. On the back, in his familiar handwriting, a single sentence: build something that outlasts you. I taped the photograph to the wall above my desk, a daily reminder of the legacy I'd been entrusted with. It wasn't about the money or the power. It was about the people, the dreams, the small acts of faith that made a life worth living. Mark came up behind me, wrapping his arms around my waist. What's that a reminder? From your father. He looked at the photograph for a long moment. He would have been so proud of you, Lily. I hope so. I tried to do right by him. You did. He pressed a kiss to my temple. You did more than right. You built something new. Something that's going to outlast all of us. I turned in his arms and looked up at him. The sun was setting outside the garden window, casting long shadows across the floor. The apple tree was its branches reaching toward the sky, waiting for spring. We built it together, I said. All of us. Your father, Roger, Arthur, you, me. It's not just mine. It's ours, he agreed. And I'm so glad we get to share it. The year ended quietly, with a small gathering at the house, my parents, Mark, a few close friends. We toasted to the future, to the past, to everything we'd survived and everything we still had to look forward to. That night, I sat on the porch with my mother, watching the stars emerge in the cold winter sky. Are you happy? She asked, her voice soft. I thought about everything, the wedding, the betrayal, the fight, the healing. I thought about the foundation, the house, the garden that would bloom again in a few months. I thought about Mark, who'd grown into someone I could truly trust. Yes, I said. I think I finally am. She smiled and took my hand. That's all I ever wanted for you. We sat in comfortable silence, the cold air sharp and clean on our faces. The street was quiet, the neighbors' lights were and welcoming. In the distance, a dog barked, and a car hummed past, and the city hummed its gentle lullaby. I thought about the road I traveled, the sharp turns, the steep climbs, the deep valleys that had nearly swallowed me whole. And I thought about the road ahead, uncertain but full of promise. I had sta route as a bride in white, full of hope and trust. I had stood at the altar, watched my world fall apart, and rebuild it piece by piece. I had learned to forgive, to trust, to hope again. And I had learned that the truest legacy isn't the money you leave behind, it's the lives you touch, the hearts you change, the difference you make in the world, one small act of faith at a time. The stars shone down, cold and bright, and I felt at peace. Because in the end, I hadn't just survived. I'd grown. I'd changed. I'd become someone I was proud of. And that was more than I'd ever dared to dream.